Have you ever found yourself in a state of silence, yet your mind won't stop its constant chatter? It's a problem everyone faces, a common experience that unites us all. We seek peace and quiet, only to be met with a ceaseless inner dialogue that can often propel us back into the past or catapult us into imagined futures. This unending chatter of the mind can stir up a whirlwind of distraction and stress, making it a challenge to focus on the present moment. This incessant noise in our heads has led many of us to yearn for its cessation. We've all heard the terms thoughtlessness and no mind, perhaps in a meditation class or a self-help book. These ideas are often seen as the ultimate goal, the solution for our mental discomfort. But are we truly understanding what they mean? Thoughtlessness is not about switching off our minds like we would a television set. The human mind is an extraordinary product of millions of years of evolution. It's a really powerful tool, full of creativity, solving problems, and innovation. So why would we want to stop it? Similarly, no mind is not a state of mental emptiness or an empty space without any thoughts. Rather, it's a state of non-identification with the thoughts that come and go within our minds. It's about observing our thoughts without getting entangled in them, about being the calm observer in the storm of mental activity. Yet, there's a common misconception that meditation or any form of mindfulness practice is about stopping the mind. This belief has permeated our collective consciousness to the point where many feel they are failing if they can't achieve a mind devoid of thoughts. But let's ponder this. Do we really want to stop our minds? Or are we simply seeking relief from the unpleasantness that can arise from our thoughts? Is it the chatter that's the issue, or how we perceive and react to it? Is it actually beneficial to stop this mind chatter, or are we misunderstanding the nature of our minds? Perhaps the problem isn't the chatter itself, but how we engage with it. And maybe, just maybe, the solution isn't to silence the mind, but to change our relationship with it. Why do we want to stop our minds? Is it because they produce unpleasantness, or are we simply misunderstanding their function? Let's take a journey back to the genesis of humanity, millions of years ago. Over this vast expanse of time, our minds have evolved, gaining remarkable capabilities and complexities. The mind is not an adversary to be conquered, but a powerful tool that has been refined by the sands of time. It's a product of evolution that has allowed us to survive, thrive, and create the world we know today. Yet, we often find ourselves at odds with our own minds, desiring to halt its incessant chatter. But why is this so? Could it be because it churns out unpleasant thoughts or feelings? But let's pause for a moment and consider, if our minds were constantly generating sheer joy and contentment, would we still wish to shut them down? Quite unlikely, isn't it? So, the issue lies not within the mind itself, but in our perception of it. Our minds are not our foes. They are not entities that need to be silenced or suppressed. Rather, they are allies, waiting to be understood and harnessed effectively for our own well-being. If we shift our perspective, we can start to see our mind as a source of pleasantness, a reservoir of creative energy, a guide in our journey of self-discovery. Instead of trying to stop the mind, we should strive to comprehend its workings, its ebbs and flows. We should learn to navigate its depths, to ride its waves, rather than get swept away by them. To achieve this, we must stop viewing the mind as a separate entity that needs to be controlled or silenced. We must start seeing it as an integral part of ourselves, a friend that is as much a part of us as our beating hearts. Rather than trying to stop our minds, perhaps we should be focusing on how to work in harmony with them. After all, a mind in harmony with the self is a mind that brings peace, joy, and fulfillment. Have you ever considered that the problem might not be the mind itself, but rather the lack of space between you and your mind? Let's think about it in terms of an analogy. Imagine being stuck in the middle of a traffic jam. The honking horns, the car exhaust, the slow crawl forward. It can be incredibly stressful and tiresome. Your mind, when it's chattering away, can feel much the same, like you're stuck in a traffic jam of thoughts. But now, envision yourself standing on a hill overlooking that same traffic jam. From this distance, it's a completely different experience. You see the flow of cars, the rhythm of the city, and you might even find it somewhat peaceful. The traffic hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. You've created space, a distance between you and the traffic. This is exactly what we need to do with our minds. When we're caught up in the stream of our thoughts, it can feel overwhelming. But when we step back, when we create a space between us and our thoughts, we start to see them differently. They become less stressful, less bothersome. This doesn't mean we're trying to stop the traffic, or in this case, stop the mind. Remember, the mind is a product of millions of years of evolution. It's incredibly powerful and capable. The problem isn't the mind itself, it's how closely we're identifying with its incessant activity. So instead of trying to stop the mind, we need to focus on creating space. We need to step back and observe the traffic rather than being stuck in it. It's about becoming a witness to your thoughts, not a participant. When there is distance between you and your mind's activity, the mind becomes a miracle, not a problem. It's about changing our perspective, shifting our relationship with our mind. Because at the end of the day, it's not about quieting the mind, but about finding peace amidst the noise. What if the root of the problem is not the mind itself, but our identification with it? Let's delve into this idea a bit. Imagine your mind as a bustling city, with thoughts and ideas as the citizens, constantly on the move. Now, these citizens, they're just doing their jobs, living their lives. But what happens when you start to identify yourself with them? You become one of them, lost in the hustle and bustle, swept away by the current of thoughts. This is what we call wrong identification. You see, when you identify with something that you are not, your mind starts to run continuously. It's like stepping onto a treadmill. The speed keeps increasing, and you can't seem to find the stop button. The city of your mind becomes a whirlwind of activity, and you're at the center, spinning out of control. But what if you could step back? What if you could rise above the city and look down upon it? Suddenly, the chaos doesn't seem so chaotic anymore. From this vantage point, you can see the patterns, the flow, the rhythm of the city. This is the power of disidentification. When you stop identifying with things that you are not, you create a space between you and your mind. You become the observer, the watcher. You can see your thoughts for what they are, just thoughts, not you. This distance, this space gives you control. You can choose to engage with a thought or let it pass. You can choose to dive into the city or just watch it from afar. It's like sitting in a car but not identifying with the car. You can enjoy the ride, but you're not attached to it. You're not the car, you're not the traffic, you're not even the driver. You're just a passenger watching the world go by. This is the key to gaining control over your mind. When you stop identifying with things that you are not, your mind will start to serve you instead of the other way around. If you stop identifying yourself with things that you are not, your mind will do what you want it to do. So, how do we gain control over our minds and stop the constant chatter? Let's summarize what we've discussed so far. We've explored the dilemma of the chattering mind, a universal issue that we all grapple with. We've pondered over whether the mind is a friend or foe and concluded that it's neither. The mind is a tool, a miraculous one that has evolved over millions of years. It's not the mind that's the problem, but our relationship with it. We then dwelt on the concept of creating space between ourselves and our minds. We likened this to observing a traffic jam from a hilltop rather than being stuck in it. The traffic is the same, but the experience is vastly different. We realized that when there's distance between us and our mind's activity, the mind becomes a miracle, not a problem. In the previous scene, we delved into the issue of wrong identification. We talked about how identifying ourselves with things that we are not leads to a continuous run of thoughts, akin to mental diarrhea. This wrong identification, we discovered, is the root cause of the chattering mind. Now, let's talk about the solution, which lies not in stopping the mind, but in proper identification and control. The key is to know how to be with everything, how to use everything, but not to identify with it. This is the right food for the mind. When we don't identify ourselves with this or that, we gain control over our minds. The mind will do what we want it to do. The constant chatter will transform into a source of peace and productivity. Just imagine, if instead of being a source of noise and distraction, your mind becomes your ally, providing insights, sparking creativity, and fostering tranquility. It's all about perspective and control. By understanding our minds and using them correctly, we can turn the constant chatter into a source of peace and productivity.
Oh, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications,